Hello and welcome to episode 58 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, along with my co-host and MMO executive editor, Mike Mayer. And Mike, things might be a little bleak in New York sports after yesterday, but the Mets are on the right track. They hired their man, David Stearns. This has been like a 3-year courtship, it feels like, but the Mets get their guy. Awesome that they could come to an agreement. Obviously, it's not official till after the season, but to be able to come to an agreement now that he's going to be joining the team right after the season ends, a full off season under his belt to, kind of do what he wants now. And, big changes in New York baseball, especially for the Mets here now. Just want to get your thoughts and reactions to this news here.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this is essentially 3 years in the making, right? Like, this is one thing we knew right early on in the Steve Cohen era, is that he wanted David Stearns to run their baseball department. It just hadn't worked out. The owner for the Brewers decided he was not going to allow that to happen until Stearns became a free agent. And Stearns kind of unofficially became a free agent on August 1st. And the Mets went right away to talking to him. I think, this is what Cohen's been waiting for. I know Mets fans are been waiting for it. And I'm sure Mets fans, Cohen, everyone involved to be super excited that there isn't going to be a search this offseason, right? Like that's what's happened every offseason since Cohen's owned the team, is there's been a search for a GM, someone to run baseball ops. I mean, even before Cohen, the last couple of off seasons before that, there wasn't a lot of certainty either. So now the Mets finally, you have to hope, David Stearns signed a 5-year deal. It's already been reported out there, which it had been previously, that he's perfectly fine working with Billy Epler. Mm-hmm. Those guys have a relationship. So there's some stability finally. And look, Cohen has a lot of money, which we saw last offseason, but the organization has still lacked that stability throughout. Mm-hmm. And that's what you hope to get by hiring the first president of baseball ops in franchise history.
Sure.
And you hope that Stearns, a Mets fan, by the way, you hope that he brings that stability and can work well with Epler. And it's great that they were able to do this now too, right? Like, to get this done, like you said, to have a full off season, because even when they've hired some folks in the past or had openings the last 3 or 4 years, they've been in a position where the hirings were kind of at weird times. So you didn't get a full off season of being able to have a normal off season and do the things that you need to do. So to be able to talk to him, get an agreement in place, and then once the season's over, get him aboard and start working on a lot of things, because there's a lot to do, right?
Right.
I'm sure we're going to talk about kind of all the stuff that he has on his plate that he's coming right into. But yeah, this is, I mean, you don't want to say, I'm not sure a home run hire, but I mean, this is, he's widely regarded as one of the best young baseball minds in baseball, right? I know it looked kind of weird because he was moved down last year by the Brewers, but you know why that happened is because this was going to happen.
Right.
That's the real reason that he was moved down, so that Matt Arnold could take over, because that's what he's going to do anyway. So why not have Matt Arnold be that guy right now and have Stearns being more like a consultant type role, as everyone inevitably knew that he was going to the Mets. So it's finally happened. I think, like I said, I think it's a big relief for a lot of people. I know Mets fans are super excited, not only just to have Stearns, because, like I said, the pedigree's there where he's a highly sought after baseball guy, but to the fact that they have that. They have that top baseball person. It's not someone just for show like Sandy Alderson was. It's someone, a young guy that you feel is going to run this organization, hopefully for a long time, if he has the type of success that the Mets are hoping. So this is just, I mean, it feels kind of weird that you can have something like that. What are we, September 12th, have this type of hiring on this date. But it's such a, I mean, pretty clearly one of the best things that happened to the Mets in 2023, if not the best thing.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, we're going to dig into it deeper, but I think this is a huge day for the franchise.
Yeah, and from what you said, it's a great point that this is going to be the first offseason under Cohen where there's not either scrambling to find that leadership to run the team or questions of who's really going to be the person that's steering the ship here. You know, Epler, as we always knew, he was not in the cards for a while. He was the last of the last option for them when they couldn't find the general manager. Obviously, you talked about Sandy Alderson, kind of the transition he was doing here. So the Mets have kind of been in flux since Cohen's, taken over. And obviously, his resources have kind of masked that a little bit at the major league level. Obviously not this year. It's more so last year, but it's great now. Obviously they took a direction this trade deadline to beef up the farm system. And now they have even more of a direction with someone like Stearns coming in. And I guess just, for the regular Mets fan, right, that's heard his name for the last few years, there may be people that say, what makes him so special, right? You have a general manager. What do you need a president of baseball ops for? So I guess like for kind of the fans that may not be too familiar with Stearns, can you kind of just maybe highlight a little bit like why he's been so sought after in the sport the last few years?
Well, I mean, people say, well, he hasn't won a World Series. Well, I mean, he's still talking about a Milwaukee franchise that hadn't won anything or hadn't made it to the postseason for a long stretch and just was not something you saw as winners. At least now they're seen as perennial contenders because they did. More than half the time that he was there in Milwaukee, they were in the postseason. And comes from other organizations that are fantastic organizations that have turned it around and are winning now. So you're talking about a guy that, again, hasn't won a World Series, but he has been in a part of teams that have won a lot of games, and he's been that head guy that's made those type of decisions. And really, I mean, like I said, the Brewers were an organization that just weren't thought of as winners, and now they're a team you look, hey, these guys are going to be in it every year. They're going to be contending every year, just a matter of kind of like what they do at the deadline and see where it's going to take them or how the division plays out. But yeah, I think it's just most people see him as a good mold of a lot of different things, right? Like scouting, analytics, being able to communicate with people. I mean, Matt Arnold last week was talking about with Joel Sherman just about what he brings to the table and the well-roundedness of what he does, and how he communicates that to everyone. And look, like I said, Epler and some of the guys he brought over from the Angels, they were new to the Mets, and they did a good job at selling at the deadline, but there still hasn't been a cohesiveness throughout the organization. And we saw that was part of the reason they fired 4 directors last week. That's part of the reason why they haven't seen as much success as you would have liked in the Cohen era, whether it's at the big league level and the minor league level too, right? Like this was supposed to be something that turned around, and it's just, there hasn't been that cohesiveness yet. I think that's what you see as a strength for Stearns, is that he's going to bring in people that he trusts, or work with people that are already here with Epler and a couple of the guys that he brought in from the Angels, and just bring, I'm going to keep using the word, I hate to do it, but stability, because it's just such a key for the Mets. And I know a lot of this doesn't get like reported on a lot, or it's behind closed doors, this type of thing, but that is the one thing that in the Cohen era, obviously besides wins this year, has been missing, is stability. There just hasn't been that where you can rely on this person to give that person information, or this person to be able to work with that other person. There's just that, again, cohesiveness is the other word that I'm going to keep saying, but that's what you hope that Stearns is going to be able to bring, because that's what has happened in Milwaukee. I think he's done a great job there in bringing both of those attributes to them. And look, I mean, I don't think anyone's going to try to down like his baseball knowledge. There's a reason why he was a head baseball guy in his early 30s.
Right.
I mean, that type of stuff doesn't happen by accident.
Right.
And he's been working with organizations that don't spend, right? And
right.
Now he's with Cohen. So again, hopefully you can see where he has the ability to, like this offseason, the Mets weren't properly ready for the season with depth. Sure. So that's something that teams that don't spend a ton of money, they have to rely on finding good, cheaper depth pieces. And maybe that's something that Stearns can help with, something that he's done in the past. I mean, look at the bullpen that the Brewers have created. Yep. I mean, obviously they traded away Hader, but I mean, between Hader, Williams, and a bunch of other guys that they have this year, they've done a really good job of creating bullpens out of depth pieces. Or pieces you wouldn't have think are going to be 7th, 8th, 9th inning guys. And the Mets really haven't done that, right? Outside of, I mean, they got one good year out of Loop. They got one good year out of Ottavino. Obviously, Diaz has turned it around, but they've really struggled to make a good bullpen. And maybe that's where we can finally see that turnaround. And I think we'll learn more as time goes. I mean, again, Milwaukee's not like a big market, so you don't get a ton of David Stearns stuff. So the fan that doesn't pay attention to the Mets on a daily basis might not know a ton about David Stearns. So I think the next couple of months, they'll really get a better idea of who he is. And I think another thing, if you watch his interviews or anything like that, he's certainly a guy that's going to have no issue handling the New York media. He's a well-spoken guy that acts like he's been doing it for a while. And that's not going to be an issue either. And I hope one thing, now that I'm kind of going off on a tangent about him, and speaking, I hope that he speaks to the media a little bit more than Epler does. I think one thing I would have liked to see in Epler more this year is talk about the issues that were at hand. It felt like he didn't talk to the media as much as, like, Sandy made a point of talking to the media, and it felt like that kind of fell on the wayside with Epler. So maybe, again, that's another leadership thing, right? And that's what Stearns is supposed to bring to the Mets.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as far as looking at baseball now and seeing the teams that do well. I think we understand there's that balance between, the in-game, the eyeball test, and as far as the analytics, but also like these teams that do so well. And Milwaukee's obviously one of them in the last 7 years, like you've been talking about with Stearns there, is the way that the folks in leadership in the front office and their people can break down that information to their players and make successful. So I'm excited to see how Stearns and his people do that, not only at the major league level, but like you're saying, at the minor league level, the developmental level, because like you said, as far as guys like Devin Williams, Haters, he's really been able to maximize with a smaller market, like you're saying, some really top end, major league talent. So with the resources like, he has with Cohen now, it really should be, even more of a success for him. He's a New York guy, grew up in Manhattan, Harvard graduate. I believe he worked for the Mets briefly, like right out of college. So he's got that connection there, which is awesome.
Yeah, he was an intern in 2000, I think it was 2008 with the Mets.
Wow. And the other thing, you talk about not winning a World Series yet, but like you said, he's only 38 years old. So there's not many folks his age that get anywhere near that, kind of position that young. So I think, the World Series thing is, that's okay there. I'm sure he'll have plenty of time with whatever he does. But, clearly he, like you're saying, his intelligence, everything else clearly isn't, impressed the sport being in position of power like that so young. So, it should be exciting. He's got the relationship with Epler. It'll be nice to see Epler not at the helm fully kind of making decisions. It'll be someone above him, ultimately kind of probably making the big boy decisions, and Epler will kind of be like the mouthpiece or whatever. So that's a good thing. Hopefully this kind of shows future free agents, things of that nature, that the Mets are serious about being, using your word, stability, bringing someone in that's going to have a clear direction of the team. And hopefully that attracts some more high quality players now down the road. I will say though, as his, first act of president of baseball operations, I would say see what Chaim Bloom did when he went to the Red Sox and do the opposite of that. Don't trade your star player. Sign Pete Alonso. First thing, make everybody happy. And again, we know numbers. We've talked about it till we're blue in the face, to all that kind of, it's a negotiation process, whatever. But this is a guy you want to keep here. Make that your first thing. Make that your first thing in the offseason. You start off on a real good note. We'll see what happens, obviously, how the Mets end the season. But going into the winter, that would put a good taste in everybody's mouth to show the commitment to still trying to win 2024 and beyond. So hopefully he does something like that, can learn a little bit. But obviously, with a new president coming in, the Mets have a manager named Buck Showalter who really hasn't signed up necessarily, didn't come in here for any rebuilds or anything like that. Reports have been coming out that's, unsure if he wants to come back for next year or anything like that. And, with the announcement of Stearns, you would think someone, like him would want to maybe bring in their own manager, someone, one of their guys. So, just want to get your thoughts on the status of where you think kind of Buck could be next year with the Mets and all kind of that.
Yeah, I was on my computer because Ronnie Mauricio just hit a 440-foot home run for his first big league.
Wow.
Homer. So, yeah, the power for Mauricio is real. And we've seen him steal 4 bases already.
Sure.
Like we talked about before. Well, after he got called up, that was something that he had certainly improved on in August, showing that he could steal bases a little bit. So, I mean, Mets fans are certainly excited about that. But yeah, to transition to Buck. Yeah, I think I know the media asked him today before the game, like if he had any conversations yet with Cohen, Epler, and he said he hadn't about his future yet. Yeah, the Mets are in kind of a weird spot, right? Where Showalter's a veteran. He had a great year last year with the Mets. This year has obviously been a huge disappointment. He has 1 year left on his deal. And you got a new president of baseball ops coming in. So what is he going to want to do? I know there was a lot of talk about Craig Counsell because he's, again, going to be a free agent.
Yep.
At the end of this year. But there's been a couple of reports saying that Counsell, because of where his kids are at in school,
sure,
is going to want to take a year off. So do the Mets play lame duck with Buck?
Right.
And just let him basically play through his contract and then Counsell's there, or you can obviously do the hiring process and maybe find someone else too if Counsell isn't a fit. But maybe that would be under the thought process of being okay. I don't want to say okay, but under the process of keeping Buck for another year.
Sure.
Maybe that plays into that if Counsell decides that he isn't available. And I mean, again, no one's going to know better than Stearns, right?
Right.
So I think, honestly, it's tough to say just because I think a lot of owners / general managers, anyone who is making the decisions, probably would have fired Buck earlier this year, I think.
Right.
Just because, I mean, as we all know, the expectations were as high as can be.
Sure.
And they fell flat pretty early in the season, the Mets did. And you certainly could have been under the impression that Cohen, Epler wanted to see a turnaround and maybe thought that firing the manager would do it. Sometimes it works. It did with the Phillies. Not saying that's the reason that they turned it around, but it did work last year with them. And sometimes it doesn't pay off. But so, yeah, the Mets are in an interesting spot with Buck and only having a year left. I would think Stearns would want to bring in his own person.
Sure.
I think that would be pretty general for him to want to do that. And I think, again, this will be, we just found out about him being hired today. So I think this is something that'll, whether the Mets talk about it or obviously there'll be sourced info out there that's going to talk about what Stearns' thoughts are on Buck or thoughts are on having for a new manager, because that once Stearns becomes official or he's in there talking to Mets people and kind of giving his thoughts on what he wants to do in different areas, we'll start to hear more stuff. But I think, and it's not just Buck too. I mean, that's who we talk about, but I think I don't think anyone on that coaching staff is particularly safe, and
Sure.
nor should they be, right? After a season like they've had this year. So it wouldn't be beyond Stearns or for him or outlandish for him to come in and just clean house with the coaching staff and bring in people that he wants to have there. And again, I don't think that's a terrible idea because of what we've been talking about with cohesiveness. Like it also feels with all the different GMs that they've had over the last 5 or 6 years is that there's been so many like weird spots where you have this person was hired by this GM,
right?
And he has to work with someone every single day on their specialty. They have to work together with someone who's just hired by the new GM. So you have these guys that are just kind of trying to work together that aren't necessarily a great fit because they're hired by two different people that were potentially looking for two different, completely different skill sets.
Yep.
So I just think it makes sense, and we'll see what Stearns does. And like I said, well, I'm sure we'll get more info in the coming weeks on what he might be thinking about doing. But I do think it makes some sense to just clean house for the coaching staff. And I think that's probably what I would do too.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I've never, as we know, I've never been the biggest Buck fan in general. And obviously, this year was pretty much total disaster. He did have a great, manager of the year last year. I'll give him that, and a lot of that had to do with Edwin Diaz, I think, and a couple other things. But I would assume, probably not fired just because of the pedigree that he has. And obviously I don't think Cohen, I think Cohen has a great deal of respect for him. Obviously that was his choice, to bring him in last year. So it would feel like maybe, Buck would be the one to say that he's stepping down, something like that, to not, I don't want to say save face, but just so both sides kind of amicably, no, he's not getting kicked to the curb, that kind of deal. But his staff, obviously same. I agree with you. Clean house. And it just goes along with what you talk continuity, right? That just having that linear same message throughout. I think it's a great point that you said. It's just the folks that have been hired the last few years. It's all been from different regimes. So it would be best for everybody at the major league level, and same thing down at the minor league level. Just having some continuity and having a good plan in place for what the organization wants. So I'm sure, like you said, we'll know in the coming weeks here. I don't think any of that we won't hear about anything until after the season anyway, because they wouldn't do that to Buck during the year. And obviously they can't officially hire Stearns till after the season's over anyway. But, a lot of things happening, should be all good. It'll be interesting because, like you said, it is the Mets waited a couple of years for Stearns. Maybe they do that gap year for Craig Counsell. They keep the theme with their Milwaukee people, I guess. But, it should be very interesting. And we keep saying, a new time for the Mets, this sort of thing. But I think this is finally that new era of Mets baseball that Steve Cohen and the fans were envisioning for that sustained success. So, they did the right thing here, and it's going to be fun for them to have a full off season. But the Mets are still playing this year. Season's not over yet. Want to touch real quick, just DJ Stewart. Been great. I know you mentioned Mauricio just blasted his first home run. He's been great offensively since he's come up, hit like crazy. But, just DJ Stewart a little bit, talk about him as possibly playing his way into maybe, a fourth, fifth outfielder role for 2024. Has made the most of his opportunities since he's been up here, and just want to, get your thoughts a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, all Stewart's done is hit, right? Especially over like the last month. He's been one of the top 10 hitters in baseball over the last month, which just feels weird to say. And he's obviously been a pleasant surprise for the Mets, and something the Mets fans have kind of jumped behind. I think there was even an MVP chant when he came up to the plate the other day. So, yeah, that's certainly one of the things Stearns is going to have to look at is what role DJ Stewart has. Has he played himself into a bench role for next year? Because he does. He's got significant major league pop. And that, I mean, that's something that the Mets have been missing outside of Alonso and now this year Alvarez. Sure. So, I mean, and Lindor too, but they need some power, and could certainly use some power off the bench. I think, I mean, I know Vogelback has more of a career basis to go off of.
Sure.
He's got a little more, but Stewart's a better fit because he can play the outfield, right?
Yeah, right.
Vogelback is a DH only guy, which really lessens what he brings to the plate for the Mets. So, I mean, if you see Stewart and Vogelback kind of close to, you think what they're going to do offensively, I mean, Stewart's certainly going to bring more to the team simply on a versatility standpoint. Sure. So, yeah, it's a nice little story that for the Mets to kind of finish off the year, see how he does to finish the year. And yeah, right. I mean, guy that could play himself into a fourth outfielder kind of type deal next year for the Mets.
Yeah. And, I think we've said it. You got to take all that kind of with a little bit of a grain of salt because, you're playing for a job next year, whether it's for the Mets or somewhere else. But, like you said, he's only hit since he's come up. So he's making the most of his opportunity. And if he continues the season ends the season strong like this, I think you have to consider it. And especially we've talked about depth, right? Didn't have a lot of that this year. But someone like him could, definitely be a part of that depth for 2024. So it'll be interesting to see how he finishes out the year. But going over to the minor league side to kind of round out the show, Mike, I think you want to give us an update on our guy, Jett Williams.
Yeah, so Jett Williams is making his AA debut as we speak. Of course, he's already been on base a couple of times. Mm-hmm. First time up, got hit by a pitch, ended up scoring a run after Drew Gilbert walked and Kevin Parada doubled Williams in. Next at bat, Williams got his first hit in AA. And Parada's got 2 hits tonight. Gilbert's been on base a couple of times. I mean, that Binghamton lineup is just stacked at the start. Acuna's not in the lineup tonight.
Okay.
Guillorme is actually leading off as he continues his rehab assignment. But I mean, at the top of the lineup, you're going to have 100 steals, right? With Acuna and Williams, I think they're right at 100 combined right now. But yeah, Jett Williams is just, look, he's 19 years old, entered this year with 10 games of professional baseball.
Sure. And
started at St. Lucie, played pretty well, went up to Brooklyn and had an OPS over 1,000. And even recently, I think the biggest change recently is the power. He had 6 home runs last month, and that's just not something he's done at the major league level to this point. So we know he can walk. He's 103 walks, I think, coming into tonight, one of the top 5 in baseball.
Yep.
And we know that he can run. He's got 44 stolen bases. But for him to add that power from that skill set, I mean, the guy's 5'6". He's 3 inches shorter than me. And so to see that talent come from that size it's just impressive. And he's just, I mean, he's in the serious conversation with Acuna and Gilbert to be the Mets' best prospect. And I think there's some people that are going to rank him that way. We'll see when the rankings come out this offseason, but I think he's certainly in that conversation at the very least. And look, he can play shortstop and he's been playing some center field too. Right. So 2 very key spots on the field. And that'll be something interesting to watch is how they play that out when Williams, Acuna, Gilbert, all those guys are in the lineup, is who plays where, who bats where too. It'll be kind of interesting. But for now, Williams hit second tonight and is playing shortstop for Binghamton as AA debut. And like I said, he's been on base twice and he scored two runs already. So they're headed to the playoffs. They already clinched a playoff spot on Sunday. So it will be the Yankees and Mets in the playoffs next week. With the first game in Binghamton.
Awesome. And it's definitely not the Yankees and the Mets Major League Club. So it's definitely not them, but that's awesome. It's really cool how Binghamton's the biggest game in town for the Mets, Major League or minor league. So hopefully all those guys continue to shine. It'll be really cool to see them in a couple of years. And it's just the theme of the Mets, the future, but the future seems bright, between the minor league level and now David Stearns coming in to head the ship here. So, I think they can be in good hands. We can only hope. But I think that's going to round out the show for this week. We'll update everybody, next week with everything from the minor league playoffs, as far as Mike was saying, and everything at the big league level as well. But until then, as always, let's go Mets.